So this is an event-driven Rails discussion panel. And it's kind of like something between a discussion panel and maybe a little bit of a confrontation. We like to confront ideas at this conference. But just to give you maybe a little bit of a context, Scott and Nathan, they're behind EventTide, a tool for kind of like a worse version of Rails Event Store, let's say. And me and Pavel are, of course, behind Rails Event Store. So this is like one kind of division between us. But actually, how many of you are using event sourcing in, let's say, in your systems? Event sourcing, let's say event sourcing, yeah. Okay, so not so many people. So actually, it's all of us here, we are in the same team of event sourcing people because we are all using event sourcing, and you are kind of the opposition to us. So we are happy to confront also with you, against you. So we'll probably talk a little bit about our tools, about paradigms. We have some vocabulary differences. So we may want to cover this a little bit, maybe not too much. We will ask questions to each other, but also we are totally open to questions from the audience. If you have some very difficult questions to Scott, feel free to ask them. Yeah, so I think we can start. Maybe you can start introducing each other just very shortly, and we can kick it off, and then we will get to some questions. I think we can sit.
You should switch with Pavel so it doesn't look like an opponent.
Okay, I can sit on the outside. Oh, no.
No, wait a minute. Now we're surrounded.
Okay, so Scott, can you introduce just shortly what you do and just, okay.
Sure. My name is Scott Bellware. I'm the co-founder of the EventTide project and MessageDB. Both of these are tools used in evented systems development. MessageDB is a tool for Postgres. It's what EventTide uses, and EventTide is a toolkit built in Ruby. My background is software testing, software design, user experience, architecture, management, babysitting, all kinds of stuff. I work with Nathan on that tool. We work together on a project for a law firm in Silicon Valley that's involved with venture capital.
Okay, so my name is Pavel Pacana. I've been working on Rails Event Store as a maintainer and as a person who does regular releases of that software for over 5 years. My whole career is based around legacy software. This is what I mostly do. I usually work on code bases that have accumulated some history. So that's a very interesting position to introduce Rails Event Store into.
Nathan Ladd, of course, I gave the presentation about Test Bench earlier today, but yeah, in addition to that, I'm sort of Scott's partner in crime on the EventTide work we do.
Okay, and I'm Andrzej Krzywda. At Arkansas, we together with Pavel, we help existing projects with difficulties, let's say. So Rails Event Store was one big thing we built together to help existing Rails projects. And also some of you yesterday at the workshop, there is this code base called e-commerce. This is like a quite big application built with Rails Event Store, but also with domain-driven design, CQRS, and event sourcing. So those are the practices that we also use. So yeah, that's what we do at Arkansas, and that's my background too. And because I know that this is already our first difference between us, so maybe we'll start with this. We embraced domain-driven design in our projects. We see the techniques behind it quite useful. Maybe not all of them exactly, but in general, it's okay. Very often, domain-driven design works very well with event sourcing and CQRS. And I know you were quite vocal to be against domain-driven design while you share event sourcing ideas and event-driven architecture and so on. So we are super similar in many approaches, but I would like to maybe start with this, why not domain-driven design?
I think that it's a cliche. And it's one of those things that is a bunch of really elaborate patterns that are so all-consuming that when a developer goes into that, they can only do that, and they start thinking only that way. So I got into domain-driven design in 2002. I'm one of the first, if you think about like the whole population of developers, I'm one of the first developers who gave conference talks on domain-driven design. I get it. I've been a zealot, but I don't stay a zealot in anything for a long time. I embrace zeal as a learning tool, and then sort of move on. So it's not that I'm opposed to domain-driven design. I'm opposed to what it has been subjugated into. And like many things in tech, I think it's just been turned into something that gives a few celebrity geeks celebrity. And in order to do that, in order to keep a captive audience, this is true in Rails as well. In order to keep a captive audience, a celebrity geek will make a tool that is so mentally taxing that the audience can't escape because they've got to be constantly fighting it. This is React, Tailwind, DevOps, Rails, on and on and on and on. Where you find celebrities, you will find subjugation. I'm opposed to that. Domain-driven design didn't used to be that way, but it has become that way. And so these elaborate patterns that have emerged from the DDD-ESCQRS community they work, but they're completely unnecessary. So for me, it's once the people go that way, it's hard to take a geek and give that geek celebrity. Geeks can't manage celebrity. And so anything where geek and celebrity comes together usually turns to crap. DDD is one of those things. Rails is another. Like, name it. Anything that we're involved with. It's okay, but it's like it's not what it. And I'm not saying like I miss what it was. It's the essence of it that's good. The essence of DDD, the design principles, the fundamentals, that's good. All the other stuff that got added to it, all the patterns from DDD, ESCQRS, not only are they problematic and overly complex, but Nathan and I did a talk in 2018 at Explore DDD Conf, specifically pointing out the mistakes in many of the tactical patterns, to use the term of one of the authors. And there's just mistakes. Like, it's just not worth it. Like, if a fundamental set of patterns has measurable mistakes, they need to be disqualified with prejudice and with alacrity. So I think it's just a way, and we're all subject to this, I think it's just a way to sound smart. All of the things that are in domain-driven design that went into the Eric Evans book, they all existed before domain-driven design. So my choice of vocabulary is to not use some specialized vocabulary of some subculture, or some subculture with its own dialect. My choice is to use the higher level vocabulary, terminology that applies to all of software, not just one subset of it. And the reason for that is you'll solve many more problems with a more generalized universal set of terminology, rather than coming up with brand new terminology. But there's no doubt that concepts in domain-driven design at the time that they came to my life, now 20 years ago, were transformational for me from being like a new senior developer to a senior developer. There's no doubt about it. I just try to avoid it. I don't want to feed energy into that hype machine, because I think it's, at this point of the game, more harmful to developers to get stuck in a scene, in a subculture.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, so your alternative to that is using different vocabulary and more general?
No, using the vocabulary that existed before domain-driven design that covers much more ground already. There was software development before Eric Evans wrote a book. The word aggregate, we used to use the word partition. What good is it to use new terminology? Like, I'm not using, what I'm saying is don't just adopt new terminology and erase all the knowledge that came before it. That's what domain-driven design to me is. There's like, is there chalk? Like, here's the amount of software design knowledge in the universe, and here's domain-driven design. I want this. If I use this vocabulary, I'm cutting myself off from this. So I will never choose a more constrained set of terminology vocabulary. So it's not just to be different or just to be a rebel or whatever. It's that there's more knowledge out there, and it's necessary. And if you spoke a language with a vastly contracted or compressed vocabulary, a human language, your poetry, your music, and your writing would probably suffer for it.
Okay, so just to be sure, if that thing was called partition, you would be all for it.
For the vocabulary, yes. And that's the terminology that I use. Because it also says what you're doing. To partition, let's take a Rails app. To partition a model, to partition a data model, the word like already tells you where you're going. How do you aggregate a data model? Like there's no more, that terminology doesn't lead to more knowledge and more inquiry.
I definitely agree that the aggregate term itself is very confusing. I don't oppose the essence of it, because the essence about invariants and what it has to know, what it doesn't have to know, is fine for me. I think that vocabulary, like you mentioned, it's sometimes constraining, because someone introduces new vocabulary for the term that already existed. It has this function of grabbing attention, on focusing the communication about the new term that describes something that we've known before by a different term. But I just wanted to know if you're opposing to the vocabulary and the hype, but you mentioned that the essence of it and how you understood it years ago was basically fine.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And the word aggregate, actually, that's just OO. When UML was being introduced in 1997, you'd go, if you were on the message boards at that time, you'd hear about white diamond aggregation, black diamond composition. Like aggregate is a word just from OO. So it just became something else. And it's not really from Eric Evans. It became something else when it got into the hands of DDDS, CQRS, who kind of like, we were talking this morning about how like Rails got the word fixture and took it, changed the meaning, and now, here's a room full of people who, if I said, what is a test fixture, they're probably going to come back and say, it's something that creates test data. That's an example of what happens when we take a well-known term and make it mean less and create a social movement around it, a clique. So, yeah, that's the part. So anything that, to me, that does that, I oppose it, because it's opposed to learning and education in order to elevate a small group of celebrities.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, I like this drawing that you made. So but let me show my interpretation.
It's very detailed.
Very elaborate.
It's also to scale.
I think.
Is it a tomato?
If I change the labels a little bit, is that here are the people that understand your vocabulary that you use, and here are the people who understand domain-driven vocabulary. Because even if it's wrong, it's very popular. And I know that.
Well, it's popular amongst domain-driven design people.
We should still fight for the language and for the vocabulary always. I agree with this. But I think this battle is kind of already lost.
But here's an interesting thing. I think that perspective actually exemplifies what I'm talking about. In the domain-driven design community, that vocabulary is very popular. But that community is so insular, it's so inside itself and so isolated that we can say, and with all due respect, that it's popular. And I don't think, I don't know about, well, actually these folks might be more clued in than the average, but the average software developer doesn't know anything, doesn't know that vocabulary.
Yeah, the same discussion we can have not only about DDD, but actually this morning example was really perfect with the fixture concept. So Rails stole many concepts. Fixture is just one problem, like active record model. Like, what kind of model is this?
Yeah.
MVC.
MVC, yeah, exactly. So Rails redefined completely many terms, and now this is the same discussion as with DDD. Probably, is there any way to fight against it, like, or we just accept it? Maybe it's like too philosophical question in general, but I think like it's super hard to just suddenly say, "Hey, Rails is not MVC."
Well, I mean, that's actually a reasonable argument to make, though.
Yeah.
It's a different point, but yeah, it can be done. The question is, like, is it worth the effort? For me, it's worth the effort because it's a moral issue and it's an ethical issue. It's a matter of professional ethics. I don't want to feed that troll of fad and of clique and of celebrity geek clique leader, because all that is doing is giving power to people who are very bad at having power.
Okay, so my approach would be to actually have a dictionary to translate from the one vocabulary to another, because I think at that scale, it's not the battle worth taking.
It's a battle for the hearts and minds of human society. I think it's worth taking, because we need to do that not only in software but in everything that we do.
I just want to say I admire it, what you do. It's a very challenging project in general.
Yeah, life is. But sorry, Nathan. I don't think we need a dictionary, because these terms are the preeminent terms. The terms that we tend to use predate to pre-exist and are preeminent to these new special things that are coming. It's DDD that needs a dictionary and has a dictionary. But I understand what you're saying. If nobody understands, you still need a translation.
It will be something different. It will be something different in the future, in maybe different scope of programming.
It depends who's there will always be celebrities trying to exploit a larger group of followers.
That's why having a dictionary would allow you to simply jump from the terms that you already know to the new world, because you have that mapping. That's one way to solve it. But I also admire your fight.
I think maybe ChatGPT can solve our problems and just... Could you explain this to me as a DDD person?
I will say, in my experience, I've definitely run into some junior and mid-level developers who have been highly anxious and concerning themselves with, am I doing DDD correctly? And to me, that's the moment where I realized, no, there really is a difference. It's not just a matter of two different terminologies. When somebody's wanting to do DDD correctly versus just design, I mean, it's in the term domain-driven design. If there is a force exerting any pressure on your design that is not your domain, you've got a problem. And to concern oneself with whether I'm doing DDD correctly, and I've seen this many times, that's where the movement is not just a different set of vocabulary. It becomes an end unto itself. And
it's a ritual.
Yeah. Whereas if you take it away, what's the goal? Well, just to do design well, and that's always been the goal.
Well, okay. If
it's not just a problem of DDD or whatever.
It's a general problem.
Am I doing Rails way correctly? Am I putting the good kind of logic into controllers? Am I using those design patterns well, etc.? And this is not just a problem of DDD.
No, but when we're in DDD's territory, we fight the DDD battle. When we're in the Rails territory, we fight the DDD the Rails. Yeah, we're always fighting the DDD. No, when Rails, fight for what's good.
I wonder, like, if there was an experiment, but we will never probably make it. If me and Pavel pair for 1 week on the same requirements, and then you and Nathan pair together, my hypothesis is that the code will be almost similar, almost identical. Maybe some tactical differences. Even though we would use what
I couldn't say that. I couldn't say whether or not that would be true, because I've never worked with you. I've read some of Arkansas's code, and thank you for Arkansas's code. Without it, event store implementation would have never come into existence in 2014 or 2015 or whatever it was. But I don't really know that's true, because what matters is software design, fundamental, deep level, finely detailed software development, software design principles. And I don't know, I couldn't say what kind of, acumen any programmer has about those things until I work with
What I mean is probably the structure will be similar. Like, I don't know, if we were building, I don't know, e-commerce kind of project, I think you would also have some kind of pricing. We would call it domain, you would call it maybe component. You would have inventory component, we would have inventory domain. Maybe inside there will be some, probably we would use aggregates, you would use entities. We would emit events from the aggregates. You would ask the entity and retrieve the state from the entity to emit events. Probably that's my understanding. How
maybe.
It work. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
So I think in general there will be differences between some tiny layers, but
like I know what you mean by we would emit events from the aggregate, because I know those patterns. The DDD style of doing event sourcing. Another term I don't like to use, but that one's done. I can't change that one. I won't fight that one. But yeah, I would never have an aggregate emit events. I think that's a mistake. I think the aggregate is not a software pattern. Like, it wasn't supposed to be a code pattern. Somebody made it a code pattern because it makes it easy for beginners to start typing on their keyboards to do that stuff. But this is the nature of the talk that we did, that you can find on YouTube. What is it? The aggregate, the something or other.
Blanking.
Just yeah. Anyway, if anybody's interested.
yeah, I'm familiar with the argumentation. Nathan did the talk here actually about this aggregate route arguments that you have against it.
So yeah, so there it is. Like, I wouldn't do that, because as a it's like what Nathan said. If a developer is focused on implementing that pattern, it's basically following a ritual, and they're distracted from the fundamental laws of physics of the universe, that's a problem. Because that software, it could be a great implementation of a DDD pattern, DDD SCQRS pattern, and the developer could be really satisfied with it, and the design could still be an absolute screw up.
I would interrupt now with a question from the audience.
If I could subtly move the topic from the DDD, which
I'm not ready for that yet.
to like the events, which the word which wasn't said yet, I think, is that, yeah, just like to start the discussion, what would you say like would be the immediate benefit of like having the event-driven architecture or something like that, because like the definitions vary and different people understand that differently, then what it would be like to convince someone in a few minutes, if they have like basic grasp that this is about components communicating through events.
Well, first of all, I don't like the word event, so I would, no, I'm just kidding. I just kidding.
Translation to Scott is
Yeah.
message-driven architecture.
It's productivity. If you like productivity, if you like not having frustration in your life, then a signals and telemetry approach. There, I changed it from events. I didn't mean to, but that's what it is. The problem is people get all wrapped up in what's an event and how do I do events right? It's like, it's basically about having autonomous pieces of software that broadcast the status of their work, and then other pieces of software can choose or to react to those broadcasts of signals or disregard that, which is opposed to what you do in active record. And so the technical terminology here is tightly coupled versus loosely coupled. But I can say tightly coupled, I can say coupling and cohesion all day, and everybody will fall asleep, because like, you either know what it is and basically it's changed your life, or you don't know what it is and you think you feel it's just random syllables. But if you really understand coupling and cohesion to the point that that's everything you do is about controlling that to the subatomic level, your productivity will skyrocket. So we work on a team. Nobody believes it like in what we do, but we work on a team for a product called Neuron. It's for a venture capital law firm. There's a handful of developers that do the work of probably a team 5 times the size of that. We don't have mono repos. We have close to 400 repos now for 15 developers. How do you do that? We changed the dials. So all the things that are typically things that slow down teams, software teams, we change those. So we're not slowed down by all the things that every other team is slowed down by. So we can take on 400 repos. We can take on vastly different approaches to doing software development that have nothing to do with the common patterns or cliches that I would say that are in there. So if you like having no frustration, if you like making progress, and you want to work somewhere between 2 times and 10 times faster than you have before, start paying attention to the laws of structural physics and how they apply to software design. Because these aren't laws of software. They're just the laws of the universe. And if we disregard the laws of the universe, software is the only thing that humans can do where if you disregard the laws of physics, the computer is going to be perfectly fine with it. If you disregard the laws of physics and you're, let's say, on Nathan's balcony, leaning over too far, you're going to pay for it. But you can make any number of mistakes in software, and the machine is still going to run it. What will be problematic is that you won't make progress. Your team will start at one level of velocity or pace, and you're going to lose productivity. You're going to lose your pace. What we do, all of our methodologies are about saying we're going to start at a pace and we're going to maintain that pace forever and never slow down. That's the thing that matters. Even though the volume of code that we're dealing with is increasing all the time, because that volume of code is increasing all the time, so is our productivity so that we can maintain our velocity. That's why events. And it's not event or evented or event sourcing. I think event sourcing is irrelevant, honestly. It's just a side effect. Event sourcing is a side effect of doing pub sub. Pub sub is what matters. Event sourcing is just a smart way to do pub sub, where you're dealing with a different kind of messaging technology. And I always say this, because you have pub sub, does anybody else want to talk? Because you have pub sub, you can have event sourcing. Because you have pub sub, you have event sourcing. I don't think that event sourcing, just we were talking about, like, here's where we go. I don't think event sourcing should exist in a Rails app.
I'm not sure I could agree, knowing that we have a different vocabulary, so I can't tell if you're meaning the same thing by using the term event sourcing.
But that kind of says that it's very hard to, like, maybe not convince, but explain someone why it is beneficial, because it's kind of, you're saying that if you would work with event-driven architecture, let's say, for some time, then you would immediately see this and feel these benefits. But until you didn't, then it's kind of hard to imagine why they are, unless you are, like you said, constantly thinking about coupling and cohesion. Then I get you. But
I think you can know it intellectually without even having experience with it, because again, it just respects the laws of the universe. So the hardest thing in software, and this is why test-driven development is so important, and I'll change the terminology to consume-first design or consume-first proofing or proofing. The reason why test-driven development is so important is because when you do test-driven development, your software is friendly to being tested. Other word for that is transparent. That's a fundamental principle in engineering. If you don't have transparency in your mechanism, you've got no way of knowing that when you change it, it will work or not. And as that accumulates, it gets harder and harder and harder. That's why software teams lose their productivity. The only reason software teams lose their productivity is that they get more code over time, and when they try to change that code, they don't know whether their changes work or not work. And it gets harder and harder and longer to prove things. Test-driven design is about making sure that difficulty doesn't go up and that it stays level. That's why our productivity stays level. And it's all about transparency in design. Telemetry is just another way of doing that. So events are just telemetry coming out of your business logic. If you don't have, like, if you have an active record callback, what was the example we gave for testing? Like, if you try to test an active record callback and like, it was like a deposit, right, or a withdrawal.
Wasn't it like an order being
That was a
placed?
withdrawal. So you do a withdrawal, and it's an active record callback. So you in one transaction, you do a withdrawal, and then you notify the fraud detection department to check on this, and then you like notify like the loyalty program software, and then you update some other software, and then you update some other software, and you update some other software. The test for that is going to be absurd because it's one unit of testing. So you take all of those different actions and you remove them from each other. And all of them can be tested as if none of the other actions even exist. That's why we do event-driven architecture, event-driven development. That's why we do pub/sub. And we have event sourcing just because we have events. But the point is, the only point to this, why I do this, it wasn't like getting years and years and years of experience. It was just common sense. If you take a whole bunch of procedural program code and you remove every unit of that code and separate them into autonomous pieces of software, your productivity is going to multiply by some function of how many of those individual pieces of the procedure exist in that procedure. That's fundamental. You can know that just by you can prove that with math. It doesn't even require experience to do it.
I would answer it very similarly, but maybe instead of following the law of physics, my argument is usually the law of the world of business. Because I believe in our software we try to reflect the business, which is just sub part of the physics, let's say. And we should follow their vocabulary, we should follow their structure, which is not always maybe perfect. Sometimes we need to teach them how to structure the business, because sometimes actually code tells the truth instead of the business telling the truth.
Sometimes the business hasn't thought in detail about what they're doing until we come along and we have to think in detail.
Yeah. Also, like we call certain events domain events because they're coming from a specific domain and they're very like domain specific. There might be integration events or some technical events, which are all very useful at certain levels, let's say. And I really like this fact that we can group those events belonging to specific domain, because now, okay, that's where I'm come back to this domain word. Okay, this is pricing domain, this is marketing domain, this is sales domain. Let's group it together because it belongs together. The same people in the real business, when humans do that, it's the same people do the same things. Those are specific roles. What Scott explained as the mix in active record and using callbacks, and you have to test everything. I agree with this totally, that you prefer to decouple it. Callbacks are usually, to me, a sign that there is actually a process from domain-driven design world. There's a process also in the business meaning. We try, because in Rails we have this magic one-liner called after create. So we use it because it's just one line of code, but actually it's a big concept behind it. And we just throw a bunch of after creates together, thinking that, okay, I have this one small class called whatever, and then just 4 lines of after create, I'm done. But actually what you did was try to hide some complexity in 4 lines of code.
Yeah, and the way to find out, the way to understand whether your system is great or garbage, not garbage, maybe that's a little strong, trash. The way to know whether or not you're going to have the productivity that you should have, or you're missing that productivity because maybe you just haven't thought of that yet, is to examine the setup code in your tests. The setup code in your tests will tell you whether you have a high quality system or a low quality system. The whole point of TDD is not the lines that say expect that or should equal or any of that. Those are just checks. The point of TDD is the setup code. The more things you have to set up, the lower quality your system is. The whole point. And the problem is when developers get a hold of a tool, they go all nuts for the tool. Like it turns on a part of our mind that likes, it's like what Nathan was saying this morning. It's that part of us that likes playing with toys. So if you're a developer who likes toys, you're highly susceptible to being distracted by all the wrong things. Because things like Tailwind can be really fun to play with, but from a fundamental design principles perspective, couldn't be more wrong. Rails has a ton of things like this. Fat model skinny controller was a very interesting idea, and the playful part of our minds latched onto that. But fat model skinny controller can be proven by simple math to be absolutely wrong. But we did it. Well, the community did it for years. So that thing that is in test tools, that's the toy. And we like the test tools, and we like playing with and experiencing those tools. But that's play. That's not engineering. Engineering doesn't derive pleasure from play. Engineering isn't fun. It's satisfying. It's rewarding. But if you're getting fun from your job, great, but be really careful. It means that there's a part of your mind that's just been shut off, and it's the part of your mind that needs to be critically thinking. And when you look at test code, like I see, like, work with developers all the time, we're very happy about their tests. And what's happening is they're very happy. They've been made happy. The reasons they've been made happy are the wrong reasons. Because if you look at the setup code in the average code base, you'll basically see all the symptoms that you need to see to understand that there's fundamental design problems.
The problem is that as long as we sit with our tests, and I agree with this argumentation, you can see setup for, I don't know, inventory where actually what you want to test is pricing.
So you got to load up the inventory system.
Yeah, but as developers, we don't really see this as a problem. And my thinking usually goes this way, that we should show our tests to the business people. And suddenly they will detect that, what the fuck are you doing here? We are meant to talk about pricing. Why are you showing me some lines of code with inventory? Like, what's wrong with your system in general? Because in the business, they would actually care a lot about separating certain divisions, not all of them, but okay, certain divisions. Like different people work in inventory, you don't want them to be included in, let's say, okay, pricing, let's say. Yeah? It's completely different concepts. They shouldn't even be bothered about this. And to this point, without events, and I think here probably we're on the same page, without events as the decoupling mechanism, we are not able to separate those concepts.
Yeah.
The only and this actually isn't pushback. I agree with what you said, but to elaborate on that example of why am I setting up inventory data when I'm trying to test pricing, the way that this can kind of transpire or play out in reality in Rails apps is often really subtle, but you'll have one product model. For a product model to be valid, it needs to have inventory data and pricing data. And as a result, in your test setup, you're having to, these different pieces of data have to be synthesized. But if you're using something like factory bot, it's already been hidden. The minute developers add the validation requirements for inventory data, they're to make the test pass, they're gonna go to the factory bot definition for the product, and they're gonna add inventory data. So it can be very, there's a whole lot of stuff in Rails, a whole lot of patterns and tools that are specifically designed to conceal all of that coupling that we're talking about eliminating through events. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, almost every Rails tutorial you will see is actually broken at the design level, because once they show a list of products with the name and the price together and validate them kind of together, it's already wrong. It's already wrong design. And I don't want to blame anyone, but I suppose 90% of the projects that are on this venue is wrong. Because it's basically like, I suppose all of us have projects where you have active record, where you have like those many concepts mixed together. So the design is just wrong.
I thought we were going to tell each other we're wrong. I didn't realize we were going to tell the audience they were wrong. I'm good with that. I like where this is headed.
You're all wrong. And you need to hire Arkansas for as long as possible and as soon as possible.
Okay, point taken.
And if you're in North America, you can hire Brightworks. But we have a treaty. It's up the Atlantic, and we're not allowed in each other's.
Yeah. When a client comes to us and says weird vocabulary, we send it to them. Yeah, what can we talk about more? About specific tools, like how you wanted to mention Eventide, how it works? Like, okay, because I think there's one area where I think maybe there was a misunderstanding between us. Maybe it's actually very different, because the way you're using the word microservice, I think is different than everyone else in the world.
Thank God.
So let's go not there. Maybe
thank God we don't have to use the term microservices anymore.
Autonomous.
What's that?
Autonomous.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, that's a blast.
Because it used to be the case that when you showed Eventide, maybe it was just accident, but okay, that was the impression that was built, that you were kind of relying on separating your components by network. Let's call it this, maybe.
I'm not sure.
I think many examples were showing this, at least, building this impression that you were quite far in this, okay, we are going microservices in the broad meaning, in the popular meaning. And when the Rails Event Store approach is basically relying on the Rails monolithic approach, one database. Okay, you still that's what fine. You actually do use one database.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yes,
we use multiple schemas in the database, but I mean, having multiple databases is often a performance.
So you use the microservices in the popular meaning, but you use one database under the.
I use microservices in the original meaning.
I understand.
Which. Having been there at the start of microservices, and before that, it used to be called service-oriented architecture, but there was problems with service-oriented architecture. Microsoft and IBM and Oracle got involved, and they turned it into a great big pile of tools. So microservices, the only reason that the term micro is in microservices, I remember all these articles like, how small is a microservice? Like, that's not what that means. The micro in microservices just means that IBM, Microsoft, and Oracle are not involved. Like, it literally is like BizTalk is not involved. The micro is a smaller footprint of enterprise tools. And then it's like, then web developers got into it. And it was basically web developers said, well, services, it's probably HTTP, right? I mean, what else could it be? There's nothing else in the universe. That's the problem of not knowing a lot about software. That's the problem of using tools that consume all your spare time so that you can't learn other things. Web developers heard microservices and recreated a failure mode called web services. Like, we'd already proved that web services were a bad idea. And then a new generation of developers thought they invented something great. And basically, what you discovered was a rotting corpse that we didn't bury deep enough in the ground to avoid you finding.
So you mean Corba was a bad idea?
What's that?
Corba was a bad idea in the past?
Well, yeah, no, exactly.
I'm old too.
But yeah, no, right, yeah. But Corba was basically like, and it's funny, SOAP and web services reinvented Corba, so. Yeah, it's just this failure mode again and again. Microservices, it's not the right way to do microservices. The right way to do software is the way that lets you go a lot faster than you go now. And that means loosely coupled. It means lack of entanglement between parts. It means that it's organic. Like, if you go for surgery on and hopefully you don't, but if you go for surgery on something in your body, like a kidney, we can do that because the kidney is separate hopefully, from the lungs. But if it's a cockroach or a worm, it's really hard to see the distinction between the kidney and the lungs. It's just well, maybe somebody's like a worm scientist is going to correct me, but it's just a pile of goo. Like, you can't do a heart transplant on a worm because there's no heart there. That's entanglement. That's why it's so hard for everybody to manage their monolith. That's why monolith was never a good idea, ever. And monoliths can't be turned into service architectures because they're already just this pile of goo. In order to separate things, they already have to be separate. You have to start separate.
Just to translate for the audience, when you mention monolith, you mean no boundaries.
No boundaries, right. Yeah,
okay,
right
so
on.
Here we understand monolith as no network between components.
I see I see how you're using network now. Yeah, for sure. What was the We were talking about entanglement. I was talking about entanglement.
About worms and how it represents
And
monolith.
worms. SOA, right. So microservices. We don't want to, I'm glad that microservices is a word we don't have to use anymore because it got so twisted and so misrepresented that it was that period between like when Eventide was, that period between like 2013 and 2023 where microservices like was really popular, and now everybody's like, oh, microservices, that was a mistake. It's like, well, what web developers thought microservices was a mistake. It's been a mistake since the 1980s. And now we can just go back to saying autonomous components.
Okay.
And so when we're going to change, like you're going to see like all the microservices mentions in our documentation materials be removed because thankfully, finally, it's a failure.
I still mean the actual meaning of this in the real world. We kind of agreed that pricing, inventory are different concepts. They kind of should be separated. But now, would you, in your implementation, there's no scalability requirements too much or performance issues. Would you hide those components behind HTTP or create?
Almost never.
Okay. Because that was my impression for a long time. So thanks for clarifying this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not needed.
Okay.
So we have HTTP. By the way, like we don't avoid Rails. There's no, like you're in Ruby. We like Ruby. We want to work in Ruby. We built Eventide in Ruby. Ruby's the right language for what we do. But if you're in Ruby and you're building anything with HTTP and you're not using Rails, then you're probably building a lot of custom stuff that you don't have to build. So yeah, all of our apps run on Rails. We just don't have a monolith. And as soon as possible, we get out, like Rails for us is a web server. The web request comes in, we deal with it, and we get out of Rails as quickly as possible by recording a message, by recording an instruction on a message queue or recording the result of processing an instruction on a message queue. But we get out of Rails as quickly as possible. That's literally not a performance thing. It's basically a human thing. We don't want a lot of code in Rails because a lot of code in Rails tends to go really bad and tends to become the anchor that slows down or buries or drowns a team. So it's still like incredibly important. Like we're not anti-Rails. We're just anti-dumb.
Anti-Rails community.
What?
Anti-Rails community. Or anti-Rails
I'm not anti-Rails community. I have great hope for the Rails community. I just think, we need to start listening to people who understand software design and not people who are cute. Sorry, Nathan. No offense to the cute people.
I'm good with nobody listening to me. That is, yeah.
Okay, I think it's time to wrap up. The time the next talk is coming. Would you like to have some final words? Anyone? Not Scott.
I don't think anybody needs to hear from me.
I think I have to add a dictionary to translate from Scott's vocabulary and to adopt autonomous for bounded contexts inside the monolith to show that we probably mean the same but use different vocabulary, and maybe on the code level we would agree at some point.
Yeah, there's a whole other conversation there about how to organize a system, and we organize our system around behaviors and around processes rather than ORM and data. And data, we just treat data as a side effect. So we don't actually have to worry about all the stuff from domain-driven design is concerned about. By the way, domain-driven design is almost always concerned with ORM.
No, completely not.
That's interesting.
Maybe it was like that 20 years ago. But
Are you doing active record with DDD?
only for read models, which is totally somewhere else. So no.
Damn it, I thought I had you in a trap, but I doubt it.
Yeah, I think that's my impression that the DD world also kind of.
For you guys, I get it because you are like already in the event world. But I think in general, when people are working with DDD, they're struggling with problems that are ORM problems.
Yeah, I share the all against the ORMs for business logic. It's a problem.
Yeah, so all that partitioning and that boundary stuff, that's all about relational databases and associations.
And it's unfortunate because let's say in Rails world, there are some other movements. Let's say, for example, there's a big initiative called ROM, which is kind of something like
Yep.
Active Record, but let's say better. But
Yeah,
I think it just
it's,
shares the same problems in general because it still tries to be an ORM to implement business logic within ORM.
Yeah, the problem with ORMs is they're very prone to being like that worm with no separation, no boundaries between the organs. Everything is entangled. There's no difference between one organ and another organ.
I'm sad that we agree on so much, actually.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Well, we've only been talking for an hour. Like if we go on, I'm sure we can disagree. Like I think we disagree. I disagree on a lot.
Well,
of
you're still wrong with the aggregate, but okay.
But like I think if we looked in detail about the way we design systems and designing it around processes, actually I can't say that. I don't know how you design systems. I've just made I'll admit I've made a huge presumption that isn't validated by anything other than my own prejudice. So I'm sorry if that's wrong, and if I'm right, I'm right.
I mean, yeah, I think we both are busy with our own projects, so it's probably we don't look at each other enough to understand where you're going, where we are going, so that's normal.
Yeah, it's like we could have a whole summit just on eventing, and that would be a good thing to do.
I still think the real battle is the Rails way versus the real
versus sanity
versus the design way.
Yeah. The Rails way is basically a bunch of shortcuts that disregard the fundamental laws of structural design on the proposition that if you do that, your work will be really fast. And what you get is your work is fast for 2 weeks to 3 months. And then it's hell, and it's 10 times slower than it ever should have been, and your life should have been a lot better. So if you, what's the old expression? If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. That's blog in 10 minutes. That's Rails. Watch out for look at the code you didn't have to write. It's like what really matters is look at the mistakes you're making that you don't know. That if you don't know what a mistake is in software design, you're gonna experience a lot of pain. Learn what mistakes are in software design and take them very seriously, and understand that they happen at an atomic level, not a visible level. You'll learn to put on a more powerful lens. Cancer starts with a cell, but you can't see it with your eyes. You're not going to be able to see software design mistakes with your naked eye early in the existence of that a mistake. You have to look at secondary effects to understand that you've got mistakes. And the problem is we're doing really, really crude things, looking to see something the size of a cell, something the size of a molecule with our naked eye, and not seeing it, deciding that there is no problems. Right, we were trying to finish, right?
Yeah. Okay, maybe just as a summary from my side, I'm happy that I met someone more radical than me. I agree with quite a lot of what you're saying. I think with my approach to Rails applications and to the Rails world is to accept the reality that it is like it is. I'm trying to fight my battle as well. However, with the Rails Event Store approach and the tool, we kind of accepted that there are many applications out there which are CRUD, which are Rails way, which are wrong. And what we are focused is not to make a perfect design in the end. It would be great. We just are focused on small steps which are getting to better design.
And I mean, you have a noble business. We don't ever work on existing applications unless we're there.
We only do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we only work on new systems. Mm-hmm. I haven't worked on a legacy system since a long time. Even when I went to work on legacy systems, I convinced the company to replace them. So I just don't do that. We work on clean code from the start all the time, and it's necessary for the kinds of work we do. That's a very big. That's a very big factor.
We are not competing.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. Like that's a big factor for Eventide. Like when you try to cram Eventide into legacy application, I would say that's like, as much as that harms me for saying don't adopt our tools, that's a very you're playing with fire. That's like know what you're doing before you do that, because that could be really harmful to your company or your project. So, yeah.
Okay, my summary would be: don't design your system like it's one cell organism and have make sure that they have visible organs within it.
Yeah.
I got nothing.
Okay. Thank you, guys. It was interesting to discuss. And thanks for the audience.
Thank you all.